On today's episode of Let's Grow Together, I talk with my good friend Kevin Mogavero, and he has such a unique story. I mean, this conversation goes in so many cool directions. We talk about jumping out of planes. We talk about the stock market, real estate, and his struggle and different things that he's done in his life, his ups and downs. And we talk about his focus point and like what is the most important thing. We talk about tough decisions that he's had to make, in his stories and just being able to reflect on those things. And there's so much value and insight that comes through his unique story to where he is now in living the dream life where he gets to spend tons of time with his family. And that is just such a noble and amazing thing. So without further ado, let's dive in. But first, the intro. Welcome to Let's Grow Together. My name is Nick Monotadibus, motivational speaker and digital marketing strategist. And this podcast is all about helping you grow both in life and business. Let's dive in. I'm so excited, so pumped. Bring in my man. This is an exciting because you and I have known each other for a good while now. And I'm glad that we've been able to stay connected after all these years. And then turns out that now we live in the same city. So how about that? Able to get together. So welcome, Kevin, to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, love it, man. This is great. This is actually my first podcast, so that's exciting. And yeah, it's been cool. I think we met each other. It was about 6 years ago. While you were still like on the East Coast and I was in Phoenix. And then, just last year I moved out here to San Diego and then you showed up. I was like, hey, what's happening?
Gotta love it. Yeah. And you reached out and that's what it's all about, staying connected and being able to get together. Gotta love social media for that. And I'm sure we'll maybe talk about that a little bit. But real quick, tell us a little bit about who you are and who you serve.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Kevin Mogavero, and I would say that I serve my family, and I've done a lot in my career to make sure that I could do that. So outside of my family, so like I work from a home office, so I get to have lunch with them every day, and we have dinner together every day, and all kinds of good stuff. So that's always kind of first for me. But outside of that, right now, at large, the people that I serve directly are small business owners who generally use Infusionsoft and all of the tools out there that connect to Infusionsoft to make sure that their marketing automation actually works. And so I help people set up and maintain their complicated campaigns. Which is fun because for most of I also help people get onboarded with Infusionsoft as well. So I contract with Infusionsoft to just meet with brand new people. And my advice to them is always make your campaigns as simple as humanly possible, because the simpler they are, the less expensive they are to run and the less expensive they are to maintain. The more complicated they are, the more people you need to service and support it. And maintain it, and every time you need to make a change, that's like money. And so, so the people that I serve directly are people that have really complicated campaigns that I go in and maintain and manage and make sure that everything is flowing and working right.
Yeah, and that's how we met, and you helped me, and that was great. Because we were able to connect. And what I loved working with you too is that you provided so much more value and insights aside from just being like, hey, here's how you do this funnel, or this technique. And now it's funny because now the memory is starting to flow back on the extensive long calls that we used to have, and you'd be like, it's okay, I'm not going to charge you for this time. It's just you and I talking. And we used to just go on and on talking about all kinds of different business tactics and strategies, and I think that that's a huge value that you bring to the people that you work with, regardless if they're using Infusionsoft, and that's how we got to know each other so well, those long, extensive conversations.
Yeah. In fact, in our last conversation, when we went out to lunch the other day, you kind of brought back that idea where I was telling you how to, it's like, hey, go ahead and sell it before you build it, right? And like make sure that like you can sell it and that people actually want it before you build it. Be upfront about it and like let people know, right? But like sell it before you build it. And then that also, once you do sell it, it gives you a whole different set of like motivations to build it.
Yeah, and the funny concept of that as well is that I didn't end up like creating and launching my course for like a whole nother year after like that conversation. It may even been longer than that. It just goes to show you how much I had that idea of like wanting to create a course and just like didn't do it. But once you do, amazing things happen. And I want to reflect too on something that you said, and I think it's so powerful, is just like keeping things simple, no matter what it is that you're doing and how important that aspect is. Because I think that is something that can be used through both our lives and our business, and just, hey, we love to overcomplicate things.
Yes, we do. Yeah, ask
It's
my wife; she'll tell you. I love to overcomplicate things.
Love it. So what I'd love to
I'll
do,
look at something and be like, "Oh, I just made this thing really simple. Look at this." And she's like, "Yeah, okay. Let me go get a PhD real quick so I can like read that, and then we'll talk about how simple it is."
well, that's always good too, to have like other people's perspective on what you actually think is super simple, because sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
But would love to dive into your story a little bit, because you have had quite the journey, specifically, from your entrepreneur journey, but also your time in the Army, which I love representing, and we're actually recording this on Veterans Day. So thank you for your service, my friend. Appreciate that. So let's start there. Like, what made you want to join the military?
Oh man. See, this is bad because other people are gonna like listen to this, and Anyways, like I ended up getting in the Army for like every wrong reason imaginable, but that also leads to another point. Is like when you see people who are in the service, right? Like as many people as you see in the service, like that's how many reasons that people are in the service. For me, I was in high school, punt kid, whatever, captain of the football team, super popular guy. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, not a clue, right? All I knew is that I wanted to play football, and so my brother had gone to West Point, several years before me, and that's the only reason that I even knew about that place. And so I was like, all right, well, let me go there, right? And the two reasons that I went to West Point: one, it was my best chance of playing Division I football, and two, it was a guaranteed job out of college. So that's how I ended up in the Army. Funny, like, so my grades weren't quite good enough to get into West Point, so I had to go to their preparatory school first. And so their preparatory school also had a football team, and so I was on the preparatory school football team. And we had our very first like live scrimmage against like the West Point like second team, right? Their B squad. And the first play that I get the ball, I come around the corner, and and like there's like nobody out there. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. There's just me and this little DB. And so I got the ball and I'm running down there, and I get down nice and low, and I could have sidestepped him. I could have done a million things, but I was like, I'm going to run this guy over. That's what I got in my head. And he got down just a little bit lower than me and did a full just like explosion into my knee. And so like my helmet hits the ground, but like my foot stuck in the AstroTurf, and like I hyperextended my knee and then came all the way back the other way. And so that pretty much ended my football career. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I still get the guaranteed job out of college. I get that. So that was fun.
Oh my God. I had no idea that you played football.
Yeah.
Wait, were you running back, wide receiver?
Yeah, I was running back. Yeah.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
I was running back for like a wishbone offense. So, it was like it's a pretty good position for there and whatever. But so yeah, so that kind of ended my football career. So I was too slow for the football team after that. So I went to play a much safer sport while I was at West Point, and I joined the rugby team, which was a great time. So safer being very much a joke. But I never got hurt playing rugby. It was a great time. It was like probably the most fun game. That's probably the most fun sport like ever invented.
You don't lead with your head in rugby like they do in football.
No,
don't have a helmet.
It's a very different tactics, very different technique. Like if football is a very, very much a precision game, and like pretty much like every inch counts, right? Where in rugby, like you can give somebody like a whole, like you can give them like half the field and it's okay sometimes, like every inch doesn't really matter as much. So sometimes field position is more important than ball possession. Sometimes ball possession is more important than field position. Like it really depends on like who you're playing and like what your style is. But anyway, it's just a lot of fun. And I'm also convinced that you could watch like 100 rugby games, and if somebody's not explaining it to you, you'd never figure it out.
Yeah, no, I believe that. From what I've seen, I have no idea. But I am curious though. So, being in the Army, being a football player, being a rugby player, there's got to be some, powerful lessons that you've kind of learned during that time. What were some of were there any like pivotal moments? I mean, even going through the injury and having to deal with that, I'm sure was not an easy thing to go through.
Man, yeah, you're definitely like picking at some old wounds that I haven't talked about this stuff in a long time. But yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously West Point's kind of a hard place to get into. There's a lot of just a lot of people there are like, they're people that have never really experienced a whole lot of failure in their life, I guess, right? And so like when it comes, because like you can't go to West Point and not fail at something, right? Like it's just going to happen. Well, I mean that I couldn't. There's probably people there that do, but not me. And so after I blew up my knee. The following year, I tried out for the football team actually, and I got cut. And then the year after that, I started trying out for the football team again. So my sophomore year, I was trying out again. And like in the middle of tryouts, like I ended up getting called into like the academic counselor because like academics were not my strong suit at West Point. So like I struggled pretty bad in economics. Like when I graduated, I was like right in the middle of the pack, right? Like I wasn't one of the like smart kids up at the front, and I wasn't necessarily one of the kids at the end, but like I was like right in the middle of the pack. But I like worked for like every grade that I possibly could to get to that middle spot, right? And anyways, to this point, right? Like it's not that I never experienced failure before this, but I never quit anything. Right? Like the only thing that I had ever quit before this was like piano lessons when I was in like, I don't know, like fourth grade or something. Right. That was the only thing I'd ever quit before in my life. Right. And so like everything else was just like, I never quit. I always kept going. And I was always like, I was always able to make it happen, particularly in sports. And so, I get called in my sophomore year to like my academic counselor. Like I didn't even know I had one until I got called into her, and I was like, okay. And so I sit down with this lady, really nice. She has like this whole, like very wholehearted conversation with me. And she's like, well, the end of the conversation after we were talking about like my academic struggles and like, how I don't really, the time that I'm using to study and blah, 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 whatever. And she's like, well, have you considered quitting the football team? All right. And it was like the first time that the idea of quitting anything had ever like entered my mind. Right. And I think I like just like broke down and started crying like right there in her office. Cause I was like, because like the first answer was like, no. Right. And then she was looking at me like, and she was kind of like in this position where she's like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I will not say another word. I'm just going to wait for this whole like scenario to sink in for you. Right. And I don't know where she learned this, like, mental ninjutsu trick. Yeah. I don't know where she learned that, but it definitely works. I just sat there and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to have to do that. If I want to stay here, I'm going to have to quit that. And it was weird. Right. And so it was like the first time in my life where I had to like deal with like quitting something, like voluntarily quitting something because I wasn't good enough. Right. And it was the hardest. I think that was like the hardest decision I'd had to make in my life to that point. And so I did. I went, like within that week, I went to the coach and I was like, you know what, coach, I'm going to quit. And, and I quit, I left, and it was like, yeah, like the rest of that year was pretty miserable. I wasn't very happy. I didn't deal with it very well mentally. But it was definitely something for me to like look at and see like, like, why do I hold on to these things? And like, where does that pain really come from? And how do I set myself up for like, like how do I sabotage myself and set myself up for failure with things that like, like, how do I know where to draw the line? Like, okay, it was clear that I wasn't going to make the team, right? Like it was fairly, like I knew that I wasn't going to make the team, but still like the idea of quitting was still just like, it was like gut wrenching. So really just learning how to evaluate things and learn like where to focus my energy and like realize that I've only got so much energy to focus, and like realize that like there are just some things that I'm not going to be good at, and it's okay. Right. Like, because if it wasn't okay, like, like it had to be, otherwise, like it had to be. So that was one of the things that I definitely learned, like going through West Point, was like how to like deal with failure, and B, like how to realize that there are things in my life that I'm just not going to be able to do, and that I've got to draw a line somewhere and say, okay, this is something that I'm not going to do, and that I'm going to choose to set my energies and all the other things like over here instead. So
Yeah, and
that's a
that's
long
such
answer to your question.
no, it's a great answer because you brought up some really, important points, because there's such a mentality sometimes of like, don't be a quitter, yada yada, um and I did want to elaborate on a point of saying, like, when you said I wasn't good, but the truth is you were really good, just weren't, like, again, compared to what, because at the end of the day, you were, at West Point, playing, trying. So you have to be at a certain caliber to even be able to walk onto that field, to even attempt to be able to, compete with those guys. So still, again, that evaluation. But and then what you said about focusing on, again, like, our energy, we're so limited by our energy. And I feel like that is something that is often underrated and under evaluated into like how we feel. You mentioned you weren't feeling great during that first year. And I'm guessing, it's because a lot of energy was focused on the fact that you're not playing football. Is that yeah? And so
Yeah, absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
nodding your head, yes, yes. So it's just the idea of what we focus on can have such a huge impact on our lives and how we feel. And as soon as you made that shift in focus, then what happened,
Uh, yeah, well, it's interesting. Like I would say that back then, like, I wouldn't say that there was a big shift, right? Like it, that lasted a long time throughout, like, like West Point was not an enjoyable place for me. I just did not enjoy that place, and I didn't like it. Uh, um, Rugby was awesome. It definitely helped me take my mind off of, like, it was a great distraction and it was a lot of fun and I loved playing it. Right. I was able to walk on the team and like I was one of the fastest guys there. So I was like, hey, this works out. But I could say that like, like I was very determined to like hold on to my misery while I was there, right? Like I just like I wouldn't allow myself to like that place no matter what I did. Even though I did like a lot of like I was able to do a lot of cool things that I would never be able to do anywhere else in the world, right? Like I was able to jump out of airplanes, climb mountains, like rappel out of helicopters. I mean, like I did all kinds of cool stuff. But for whatever reason, I just would not allow myself to enjoy being there, right? Um, and so I learned, again, the things that I learned were really just about me, right? Like I learned that like, like I can, like I'm not one of those guys that's like super excited one minute and like, mad at the next minute and then like somewhere in the middle and like, that's not just generally how I am. I'm kind of like an even keel kind of guy. And when I'm down, I'm like, I'll stay down for a long time. And if I'm like up, I'll stay up for a long time, in the middle, right, whatever. And so like West Point was like 4 years of just being down, right? And and it wasn't until like much later in my life, right? Probably, sometime after getting married and having kids and stuff, that I realized that I was like I'm doing this to myself, right? Like I don't have to stay down, right? Like this is, this is just me doing this to myself. And I heard somebody, I don't remember who said it, but like a quote, it was like, tragedy plus time equals humor, right? And so like one way to kind of get through life in a slightly better fashion is to like, make the time piece of that equation shorter, right? And like just be able to laugh at yourself and like get over stuff and whatever. And so like now, like, it's not that I don't ever get down, but I don't stay down very long, right? It's like I get down, I'm like, all right, and I just kind of get back up and like, get back to that middle even keel kind of place. I guess slightly more stoic, I guess, where like I don't get overly excited or, overly upset about things anymore. But like, again, it was like this idea of having kids and just like having this, like, having a family that like now I have, right? Right. Cause like there's no instruction book for this. It's like, oh, like, okay, what do I do with this? All right. Like I thought this was going to be easy. And, it just helped me realize a lot of things about it. Also just going out and being an entrepreneur as well, where it's like, all right, things come fast and you just got to be able to roll with it. Right. And, now I can say, and my wife again would attest that, when I look back at like my life or just like, just my past, like I look back with very rosy glasses, right? Like all the things that like I just didn't like about my past, like I tend to either A, not remember them, or B, just remember them in a much better light than they actually were, it was like being at West Point, that was like 4 years of like down. So like, like that's easy to look back and be like, yeah, that wasn't very rosy. But now I can look back and be like, oh yeah, like these are the things that I learned, and like, yeah, I'm glad I went. It was awesome. Well, it wasn't awesome, but I'm glad I went.
Well, I feel like I would do a disservice if I didn't ask about you jumping out of airplanes and rappelling down mountains, because that just sounds so awesome. So
Yeah.
Was that part of the training? How does that, was that just like something you guys do in the Army?
Yeah. So I went to airborne school, right? So there is a school in the Army for airborne soldiers, right? So if you ever heard like the 82nd Airborne, right? They're probably like the most famous, the 101st, right? So these are units that train, right? Like they go down to Fort Benning, Georgia, right? And we train and we get into big old, like, basically cargo planes, right? And they fly them up and, you learn how to jump out of planes and land, right? So like, I'm sure you've heard of like, like the stories, like, I don't know if you've seen like Band of Brothers, right? Which is a great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But they talk about, how they went and like on D-Day, how they kind of went behind the lines and they dropped all the guys out of the sky and, they landed on the ground and started running through. And that was like the first time that we've like actually did like a live, like, like in combat airborne operations, right? And so anyway, so at West Point, I got to like in the summer, you kind of get to choose like different electives, right? So like, you're still kind of going to school during the summer. It's just like you're not at West Point necessarily doing their stuff. And so one of the things that I chose was to go to airborne school. And Yeah, that one, it was funny, right? So I just talked about like how I spent 4 years down, right? But that was something that I wanted to do so bad, right? That, I say like when you go to an army school, they definitely find a way to make it not fun, no matter how cool you think that school is going to be, right? And that was like the way they make that one not fun is they make you run in formations very very slowly, like forever, right? And you feel like you're just running forever. You're like, oh, but you're super slow. You're in combat boots. You're running like in a circle, in formation, right? It's just like the most monotonous thing on the planet. And then they're sitting there screaming and yelling at you, kind of like basic training, but like while I was there, I was like, dude, I don't care what you do. I am going to enjoy my time here. This is going to be amazing. I don't care what anybody does, right? So I'm down there doing push-ups with a big smile on my face, like, yeah, I can't wait. Yeah. And so while you're there, like you get like 5 jumps. So I got to jump out of a plane 5 times. Yeah. There's some kind of funny stories around that as well that, yeah, like I get comfortable with things a little too fast. Like so I had braces at the time. So I'll tell you, I'll tell you a funny story. So I had braces at the time, right? This will be relevant at the end of the story, but like when you get on the plane, you've got like the jump master, right? And so the jump master is the guy who like kind of stands at the door and like he's checking the door and he does all the stuff, right? He's the one that gives all the orders, like stand up, hook up, right? He's the one, go. Like, so he's the one that tells you to go. And if you don't go, he's the guy that kicks you in the ass to get you out of the door, right? Which they literally do. They will kick you in the ass to get you out of the door. And so they try to take like they have like chalks, right? So like sections of people, right? Like so each chalk is like I don't know, like 9 people or so, whatever, right? And you have a chalk leader, right? And so the way that you get on the plane is the opposite of the way that you get off the plane. So the chalk leader like comes on last, right? But then they're the first ones to jump out, right? And so like on our 3rd jump, I was like, I was the guy behind the chalk leader, right? And I was like, hey, so like we're walking up to the plane, we're all getting on and everything, right? The turf, like the propellers are going super loud, and I'm like, hey, he's like, what? I was like, let's switch places. He's like, why? I was like, I want to go first. He's like, okay, right? Because like when you go first, like you get to stand in the door, like you're just standing in the door and you're waiting for the guy to say go, and then you jump out. Like if you're not first, then everyone else, you just kind of shuffle to the door and you just go, right? Like you don't get a chance to like really stand there and look out and be like, wow, right? And I wanted to do that. And so I was like, let's switch places. Like, okay, right. So we switch places. And we get on the plane, right? And now the plane's up, we're flying. I'm like in the first seat. I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome. And the sergeant airborne was like this old, crusty, just like typical, like, if you've ever seen Full Metal Jacket, right? Right, like the drill sergeant Full Metal Jacket. This guy was like that, but like taller and skinnier, and like his face was all wrinkled, right? I mean, he was perfect. He was perfect for this role, right? And so, so he's getting up, right? He's just about to start doing like the checks on the door and doing all the things Sergeant Airborne does, right? And or that the jump master does, right? And so he's just about to do those, and he looks over at us, and he's like. And he goes over to the guy next to me. He's like, aren't you the chalk leader? He's like, yes, Sergeant Airborne. Right? He looks at it. He's like, then what the hell's he doing there? He's like, he wanted to switch. Right? And so Sergeant Airborne, like, he kind of takes a step back, gives me this grizzled look, right? And he like gives me the finger, right? And I'm like, oh man. Right? But he doesn't make me switch. I'm like, sweet. Right? But he's like, gives me the scowl, right? And then he goes and he does that. He checks the door, right? He does all those things, right? Now they don't have to do this, but every now and then they do. But they'll grab the sides of the door and they'll just lean all the way out, right? And so then they look to like the back of the plane, and then they look to the front of the plane to kind of make sure that there's nothing there that would like hit you or whatever, like be an obstruction as you jump out. And so he's leaning out, right? So like you could picture, he's got both of his hands on the side of the door. He's leaning all the way out the door. Right? And he kind of looks this way, right? And he kind of looks back in, right? He's looking at me, right? He kind of looks back in and he's looking at me. And like I said, he's kind of like, he's like this old leathery wrinkled face. right? And so as I'm looking at him, like I just got this big, shit-eating grin on my face, right? And like the wrinkles on his cheeks are just like flapping. There's like, right? Because like we're in a plane, like we're like moving, and so they're just like flapping, right? And so he looks back at me, right? And he kind of gives me this mean look, like, and then he opens his mouth, and like his cheeks just open up. They're like, it was the funniest thing I think I'd ever seen in my entire life. So this guy's cheeks looked like he had apples, like grapefruits, in both of his cheeks, where they're just open while we're flying. Yeah, it was hilarious. And so anyways, so we get up, we do our checks, right? And like, now I'm standing in the door, and so like, you stand up, you hook up, like you do like a check, right? Everybody checks everybody else, right? And then like the guy in the front's like, all's okay, jump master, like after everybody else says what they're gonna say, right? And so then you just stand in the door, right? And like, you're like in a plane, just looking out the door, and you're like, oh, this is awesome, right? All the wind's coming in, right? And like when the master says go, like you jump, right? So, needless to say, I never heard the word go. He kicked me like he never said go. He just kicked me out the door. So I'm just standing there, and he just boom, and I just like, oh, I go falling out the door, which is pretty fun.
He took that from you. You wanted to jump out, and he was like, no, I'm kicking this guy right out.
Yeah, which was fine. Like I wanted to be the guy standing in the door, right? The fact that he kicked me out, I deserved it. That was fine.
That's so
fun.
incredible.
But again,
I have gone skydiving, and it's exhilarating, but I find it so interesting to do it in this mentality of like doing it 5 times and being like super eager. It's awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't wait. So anyway, so when you jump this way, like it's a static mount, right? So your parachute is connected to the plane. So like you don't pull your chute when you jump out. You just jump out, and the plane pulls the chute for you, right? And so when you jump out that way, right, like you jump out, and as soon as you jump out, because you're still connected to the plane and it's pulling your thing out, you end up like turning sideways, right? So like you're like parallel with the ground, like sideways. And so, and you've got like these, the risers that are connected to the parachute, right? They come flying out, and they're like that thick, that super thick material, right? And so what you have to do is like keep your head tucked down while you're holding onto your reserve. You keep your head tucked down. You got a helmet on, and so that way, when the riser comes, when you're leaning this way, when the riser comes this way, it goes over your helmet and not over your face, right? So since this guy kicked me out, I was like, no, like falling off of the plane, right? And the riser just right across my face. And like I said, I had braces at the time, so. Like when I got to the ground, I had to like pull my lip off my braces and all that kind of good stuff. But it was hilarious, and it was a good time for sure. So there you go. So there's a nice segue.
Yes, just jumping out of planes, getting your lips ripped off. That is so time. Wild. My experience jumping out of a plane was, and still to this day, the most exhilarating feeling I ever had. It was just one of those things that I knew I was never gonna forget. Because it's funny, there's so much fear the first time around, especially like the buildup. I just remember being so utterly horrified. But then when I actually stepped out on, off of the plane, all the fear was gone. It's just that idea of what, the actual fear was the getting to the point of skydiving, not the actual skydiving part. So I'm curious from your end, did you have any fear when you went on the first jump? Like what was going through your brain when you were going through your first jump?
Yeah. Anticipation is always anticipation is always worse or, better than the actual experience, which is kind of funny. So like the anticipation of doing all that stuff and the fear that comes with that anticipation, definitely, is usually, like you said, like worse than the actual doing the thing. And all of the fear kind of goes away when you do that. But for me, like, again, it was something that I wanted to do for so long, and I was so excited about it that like, there wasn't really any fear. Like I just couldn't wait. I was like, I was giddy the whole time, I guess. I was so
Just
excited. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I was actually like when I did the jump and I was like out and the parachute was up. I was a little disappointed. I was like, oh, I was hoping it was gonna be more free fall.
right. So I guess that is the difference too, in the way that it's you're getting your chute like pulled right away. Now, have you
Yeah.
gone back? Have you gone like skydiving, or have you jumped out of plane since those like 5 jumps?
I have not, although it is something that I do want to do again. I did opt to get like some other things. Like I ended up going to get like my scuba diving license instead. Like so I had like this time was like, you want to skydive or scuba? Skydive or scuba? And so I ended up going scuba diving and I got my scuba license and did some of that stuff instead. But it is still like it's one of my, I guess you could say like, bucket list kind of things is I want to go squirrel suit jumping, right? Where you get like those wingsuits on, right? And in order to do that in the US, you have to have at least 100 skydives under your belt or like booked. So that's something that is still like on my radar, something I still want to do. So yeah, so I will be doing it again sometime. I don't know when.
Side note, I am looking to go skydiving for a second time. So if you want to go, you let me know.
Now I've got an excuse that I can like, oh, hey, Nick invited me to go with him. So I'm going to go, right? Right now I feel kind of guilty. I'm like, hey kids, I'm going to go skydiving. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are a little less hesitant to doing something like that when they have kids, but at the same time, like you're like more likely to get struck by lightning than, like,
yeah. And it's not so much kids like I'm like gonna die or anything like that. It's just like, like on the weekends, like that's really where we get to hang out and do our stuff. And so that's when I'm hanging out with them. So as much as I like skydiving, I like hanging out with them more.
Yeah, and I love, what you brought up when I asked you, like, who do you serve? Because you did answer the question differently, and I think that is awesome because that's what this show is all about, is bringing in different people with unique answers. And you said, who do you serve? You serve your family, and I think that honestly is like the best answer that you could say, because it just shows where your priorities are and what the most important thing is. And in business, it's so easy to get caught up in other things, with like, oh, I'm doing this. Am I trying to do that? I'm trying to grow the business. So it's great to see that you have that priority of like what's most important, and everything else kind of comes second.
Yeah, it's thank you. And like it was really like to get to where I am was a lot of work, like for me mentally to be able to get to this place, right? So a little bit more of just kind of like my journey and how I ended up getting here. So I graduate West Point. I'm in the Army. My first duty station's in Korea, and and I kind of know already that like the Army just isn't the place where I'm gonna like spend my whole career, right? Like I just didn't want to. I don't want to be a career guy. I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. This is kind of fun, but like this bureaucracy is killing me. Like everything just like, I don't have control over anything, right? And strangely enough, like one of the things that just like, bothered me a lot was like the fact that when I wanted to go on vacation, even if it was for like just a couple of days, like I had to ask somebody else permission, right? I had to have them sign a thing and I had to tell them where I was going to be and all this other kind of stuff. And I was just like, really? Like I'll be back, right? And so that was kind of stuff that bothered me, right? Anyways, so I kind of knew that I didn't want to be in the Army altogether, right? Somebody, I don't remember how, but like somebody passed me Sandy. Yeah, it was actually Sandy. She gave me a Rich Dad Poor Dad book, right? She's like, go read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I was like, okay. So I can read Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? And I'm like, I knew there was a better way, right? So I was like, all right. So now I'm all excited, right? I'm like, I know there's a better way, right? But I'm in Korea, right? Like, all right, well, what am I gonna do? I don't know. So I started messing around in the stock market, right? I was like, okay, cool. Let's learn about options, right? Like this is gonna be the coolest thing ever. So started learning about options, and this was the year 2000, right? And I ended up putting like a lot of my money and a bunch of savings, and it was bad, like into a stock option, right? And ultimately the deal with options are, right, like there's a time limit on them, and once you reach that time limit, like it's either you sell or you don't sell, and if you don't sell, then like it's gone, right? And basically my option price went to like zero. I was like, I didn't even know that happened. Oh crap! And so like I lost everything. I was like, crap. Like, so everything I put in there, I lost it, right? And so that's kind of when I learned that, like, the stock market is really a gamble, like no matter how coolly, like, and so the big like .com bubble was like, that's why 2000 was relevant, because the .com bubble was kind of blowing up. And so I realized that it's like, it's a gamble, right? Later on, I read a book about like Warren Buffett and how he actually made his money through like venture capital, and basically how he controlled the companies that he was like invested in, as opposed to like he just invested in these companies and they happen to do well. Like, no, he like went in on the board and actually like started controlling the company. So a little different story. But anyways, regardless, right? Like, so to me, I was like, all right, stock market is little different than Vegas, right? Yeah, there's probably, ways to like, make it less risky or whatever, but like, I'm not spending my time doing that because I don't enjoy that. Like sitting there, like researching companies isn't what I want to do with my like free time, right? So then I was like, all right, cool. Well, when I get back to the States, I'll start buying real estate. And so I got back to the States, and I didn't necessarily start buying real estate right away. I was just kind of like, I was learning about it and I was like talking to other people. And then I ended up deploying to Iraq. So I was over there for a little bit. And then I came back, and then I left Fort Drum and went to Fort Sill. And when I was at Fort Sill, I ended up buying like 5 properties around Fort Sill, right? So I had 5 homes around Fort Sill. I lived in one, I rented the others. But again, like I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like winging it, right? And like none of those properties were bought like with a great deal, right? It's like, oh, I got a great deal, right? I was just kind of doing the math in my head, like, all right, well, if I rent it for this and the mortgage is going to be that, and then if I get like, my rental income will be this plus the management fees, and yeah, this will work out. Like I'll make I'll make money every month. This will be good. And it wasn't a ton, right? It was just like, just a little bit. But either way, so I had 5 properties, right? I'm like, all right, this is awesome. And so then I ended up getting out of the Army and I moved to Phoenix because it was the fastest growing city in the country. And I was like, all right, well, there's opportunity. That's where it is. So I got a job in Phoenix, and I wanted to start buying commercial real estate, right? So I moved to Phoenix in 2005, and I started buying properties in 2006. And everybody knows about 2008. But like that market actually started crashing at like, towards the end of 2006, kind of into 2007. And so I had to short sell a property. And then because it was an investment property, they came after me for a deficiency judgment. And so then another huge chunk of my life savings went into paying this deficiency judgment, which was fantastic. And then I ended up selling all the properties over in Oklahoma and basically breaking even on them, except for one. I kind of kept it for a little while, but then, like I changed my email address, and apparently I never told my property manager. And so the house was empty for like 6 months and I didn't even know. And I finally, like, one day I decided to look at my bank account and I was like, oh, hey, I've only got enough in here for like 1 mortgage payment. Like, what happened? I call my property manager. Oh, there's nobody in there. Like, you didn't think this was worth calling me about? You just thought like a single email, like, oh, hey, nobody there. That was good. Okay. So that was interesting. But whatever. And I ended up like quitting my job, right? And I was like doing all kinds of odd and end jobs, just trying to figure things out. So I was working at Honeywell. It was a really good position that I kind of torched so that I could go do real estate. And, I was like in a network marketing company and whatever. And so like all that stuff just kind of crashed, and I was like, crap, what am I going to do now? And so I kind of started this little business that, for, in hindsight, like literally never put a dime in my pocket. It only took money out of my pocket. But whatever, right? I'm running this little business, and I'm trying to, like, do that, and, you know, still like feed my family. And, so like the idea of like working from home or just like being able to do something from home was like I'm never going to get there, right? Like I'm going to have to like do something huge and sell it or something. And then like I'll just retire and just stay home with my family. But like other than that, like I just don't see a way to do this. So like back then, like it's something that I really, really wanted, but I just didn't see a way to like ever do it, right? And so then, so like I said, it's taken like a lot of just like odd and end jobs, right? Things that like you just never imagine. Like one of them was like I ended up like at a used car sales lot as like a sales manager, right? And like I was digging, like I was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Then I ended up getting a job at like a gas station as like the night clerk manager, right? So I'm working nights at a gas station, trying to run my business during the day, networking, doing all kinds of things. I mean, it was crazy. So anyways, then I ended up like, getting a job at Infusionsoft. And like through all my networking, I met like one of the executive level people at Infusionsoft, and, ended up getting a job there. And that's kind of where I really started to learn more about like marketing, like, like what I actually like the marketing side of business. And Infusionsoft at the time was only like 100 and some odd people, right? So it's still fairly small. I got to see a lot of like the inside workings of how things were working and why. And, so it was like, I was getting like a really good education there. And I saw like all the things that I did before that were just like, naive, right? I'll just leave it at that. And so it's like, okay, all right, like let's try this again. So I leave Infusionsoft, and I just started doing like my own Infusionsoft consultancy, agency, kind of one man band kind of thing. And so I, like when I left Infusionsoft to do that, right? Because like I was actually commuting like a good like 45 minutes to work and like an hour and some change back, just because the way traffic works. And so I was like, so even then I was like, I can't, like, I'll never be able to just be at home, right? And so anyways, all that happens, right? And I left Infusionsoft, and I was able to like start doing like, like my consultancy from home, right? And I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to get an office and do all this stuff, right? And then I just, I like really stopped and thought about like what was going on. I was like, I don't need to do any of that. Like after a couple of months, I realized like, hey, you know what? Like I can actually get some like recurring customers. I can make some things happen, and like I don't have to go anywhere. I can stay right here, right? And so I was able to stay home, right? Like have lunch and dinner and breakfast if I want it with my kids, like every day. And like the weekends were still free, and anytime I wanted to take time off during the week to go do something, I could just like block off my calendar, and like that's it. I'm like, all right, yeah, I can tell a couple people, hey, it won't be available, right? And maybe I have to find somebody else to be like, hey, if they have a problem, like go reach out to that guy, right? So I had to make a couple of precautions or whatever, but that was it. And I was like, all right, let's go, And so as a point, right, like 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, it was, it happened to be like one of the lowest tides over at the Point Loma tide pools, and my daughter's really into like marine like biology stuff, and I was like, let's go. And so there we are, Thursday afternoon, right after lunch, hanging out down at Point Loma. I forget the name of the place, but like at the end of Point Loma, and checking out the low tide of all the tide pools and stuff. And we ended up seeing like this big old octopus, and like I love octopuses. I've never seen one out in the wild before, and sure enough, man, there it is. And like one of the park rangers was there, and he's got like this stick, and the octopus is like putting his arm up there, and we saw him kind of swim around. I was like, dude, this is awesome, So I'm there at my kids watching this octopus out in the wild on a Thursday afternoon. I'm like, all right, you can't beat this with a stick, right? Like this is like the coolest thing ever. And and like I know that most people be like, oh, you gotta building, like if your business isn't growing, it's dying, and all those other kind of things, right? And I get that, right? Like I totally get it. And I'm all about that, but like I also understand like what it takes to do that. And, at this point in my career, like I can make this choice and say, I'm not willing to do that right now. Right. Like because of what it costs to do that, I'm not willing to do it. Yeah. And so like, as you know, like I've got ideas falling out of my pockets, but like I know what it takes to like make those ideas and get them off the ground, but like I don't. Another thing, by the way, that also, added to a lot of the education was, um, shortly after I left Infusionsoft, there's another friend of mine that worked there who left as well. And he went on to start a venture capital firm. So he was like instrumental in helping them get like their latest round of funding when we were there. And so he went and created his own venture capital fund and, kind of brought me on as like an analyst. And so, I spent some time with him and like helped, like I watched how he grew the fund. And then like as he started, got like, his committee meeting and started investing in these small businesses, like I was there when they were like making the decisions about like who to invest in and why. Right. And so from that perspective, I was able to kind of see all the things that were going on there and like what it takes to like get there and what those people were going to have to do in order to, like receive that money and what they have to do after they get that money and, all these kinds of things. Right. Which was more of the, I'm not willing to do that right now. Right. There's a time and there's a place where I might be willing to do that. But right now, it's just not that time and place. So, yeah.
Oh, you're living the dream.
Up, right. So now that you bring it up, right, like I can go all the way back to, like my time at West Point where I had to like, where like I had to make that decision to like quit the football team and like, and that was like a point in my life where I was like, okay, I've got to make a decision to do something that I don't necessarily want to do to get something else that I want. Right. Like I wanted to graduate. I didn't want to, like, I definitely didn't want to quit like the academy. Right. I wanted to graduate. I also wanted to play football. And so like I had to choose. Right. And that was a tough thing. And so now, right, it's like I want to grow my business, but I also want to grow my family, and so I'm choosing to grow my family as opposed to like being breakneck guy on my business. Right. And I'm not like the kind of guy, like, I see like, like some of my kids like take like, so my kids take these other classes, right, that are like now they're online or whatever, right? And the teachers are basically just like, they're not like, they're part-time teachers that kind of like do this stuff on the side, right? And like, one of them, like, I don't know how she does. She's like Wonder Woman, right? She teaches this class, right? And like, and now that everything's on Zoom, she like drives around and like gives people like the material that they need for it's a baking class. So she drives around and gives them like material for the baking class. She also works as a secretary for another business. She's got 4 kids, and there's something else that she does too, like work-wise, right? Like she's like a freelancer of something else, right? And I'm just like you somehow have like mastered the art of like infinite energy and like the master of being able to like bifurcate your attention. Like, I don't know how you do this. That's amazing. I know that I can't, but you are amazing. Like I know for me, like if I was going to try to do even half of that, half of them wouldn't come out nearly as well as they need to be. And I'd probably be pretty disappointed at like, everything else that I'm doing. Like it just wouldn't turn out well. So like I know that about me, and that's okay, right? And so like I make that choice. So yeah, there you go.
No, I love it. And again, I mean, because I think it's a tough choice to often make. And is it possible to potentially grow the business and still have time with your family potentially? But it's also about where do you want to spend your time? And I love that that's what you've chosen to do. I think that that's it's all about the mindset around it, like you're not going to regret spending more time with your family. You're not going to be like, oh man, I wish I didn't take my daughter, on a Thursday to go see an octopus, And then, so I think it's an important lesson, especially because there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening. We get wrapped up in our mind. We want to work, work, work. And there's just so much more to life than trying to build a business and to just like enjoying it, because what is the point if you don't enjoy the journey, you know? And I think that that is, you know, in summary of like the things that you know you're discussing, again, like the power of family, and you know how all of the choices that you've made have led you to where you are today, that allow you to take those Thursdays to spend the weekends with your kids. And that's a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing.
Thanks. I mean, I'm a little biased, but yeah, I think so too.
No, I love it. I love it. And you've mentioned, you know, this has been extremely valuable, you know, in your experiences and your journey of just everywhere you've go, you know, like you talked about just the focus points and having to make tough decisions. You know, that's such a huge part in how can we make, you know, these decisions, especially one that is conflicts, you know, with what if it's two things that we want, and
Yeah,
having to make that
that's what
having to
makes it
make that
tough.
choice,
Yeah,
and having the focus of the things, focusing on the things that we want. You know, how much did you talk about that? You talked about, you know, what do you want? You know, you wanted to work from home. You didn't know how to do it at the time, but you figured it out, you know, and eventually got it. And I think that is so powerful. Um,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and so as we
And
wrap this up,
there's
sorry, what
certainly
were
a
you gonna
fair
say?
amount of luck in there. You know, that's for sure.
So modest, so modest. As we wrap this up, I know you mentioned a few books. You mentioned The Rich Dad Poor Dad, which, you know, to me, that's like such a powerful book about money that everyone should read. And you know, there's real estate involved in it, but it's just really eye opening about the perception of money, that I think is like one of those, like, I think it goes with like Think and Grow Rich, in just like one of those books that everyone should read personally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So, like, if I were to recommend any one of his books, it would be The Cash Flow Quadrant.
the
Yeah.
Cash
So
Flow
Robert
Quadrant.
Kiyosaki's Cash Flow Quadrant. Yeah. And unfortunately, I've actually had a chance to meet, you know, the author. He's got really good editors.
What do they say? Never meet your heroes. Is that? No, but other than that, so we got that. Is there any other book recommendations that you have that were just like absolutely, um, you know, huge in your development?
Yeah. So when I wrote the thing to you, like I kind of went back and looked through a bunch of books that I read in the past, and like I put like all the ones in there that I thought had made a pretty big impact. So I didn't memorize the list, but like I definitely sent it to you.
So it's in the bio, in the show notes. We'll
Yeah. So, you know, some of the ones like recently, right? Like, so recently I read, like I had a chance to work with a guy named, Dave Maxwell, and like, you know, he was writing a book and he wanted to get it out there. And I was like, all right, well, let me check out his book. Right. You know, he had hired me to do some stuff, and then I read his book and I was like, wow, like usually like I wouldn't expect, like, I didn't expect much. And I was like, this is actually a really, really good book. And it basically talks about like, you know, a very practical way to start a business from like nothing, right? Without wasting a ton of time, without spinning your wheels and, you know, stuff like that. It's really good. And, you know, and it was interesting because like there's like the practical side of it, and then there's like the woo-woo side of it, right? So he gets a little touchy-feely talking about like, you know, emotions and all this kind of stuff. But like in a way, for me at least, and I was like, you know, like, yeah, like he's a little bit woo-woo talking about this stuff, but at the same time, like I feel these emotions, like I feel the things that he's talking about, and like I know these things happen to me. And so he mentions like, you know, this coach that he has, and I was like, all right, you know what, let me look this guy up. And he was actually pretty hard to find because he doesn't have a website, he doesn't put himself out there, right? Like it's just the way that he is. But I found him, and you know, like, and so that book has been instrumental for me in both that, like, it's really cool practical way to think through things, and like look for and plug holes in your business if you're already starting one, or like, you know, look for and set up like, really cool businesses if you haven't, right? It's a good book. But I found that coach and, started like, I hired him, and like from the mindset perspective, like the stuff that he does has been like very transformative for my mindset in general. It's been awesome, right? And like, a lot of times when you hear mindset, right, like you think of like, raw, 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 yeah, I'm ready. Oh, I'm gonna go through this wall. And I'm gonna break through the wall, right? And like, yeah, like this, like somehow you end up with this like, unstoppable amount of willpower, right? But clearly that it's not the case, right? And more of just like the internal emotional battles that we all have, and being able to like notice them, right? Where you can notice the feeling and understand that the pain that you're feeling or whatever emotion else is coming with it, like just understand that like what you're feeling is real, but it's not necessarily true, right? Like the reason that you're feeling it isn't true, right? And so if you can like feel that pain, right, just be like, all right, there it is. Like I can't get rid of it, and like actually just feel it, right? But then notice like why you're feeling it, right? And it's kind of like noticing who is feeling it, right? Because there's like, I think of it as like other, just like people in my head kind of thing, like, oh, like, it's this guy, he's thinking this stuff, and like he thinks that all that stuff is real, right? And that's why we're having this reaction, right? And then like you kind of start becoming like friends, because you can notice that like who that person is, and you can notice that it's not really you, right? Which is why the things that are being said that bring up those emotions, right, like are generally not really like true, right? The feeling is there, but like it's not really true. Very Byron Katie-esque, which is another great book, by the way. Loving What Is by Byron Katie. And so then like you get to notice the person who's having that emotion and having those feelings. And then like when you notice them and they're not you, like, but you realize that it's something inside of you, right? Like this really interesting feeling of compassion for like those emotions like start coming into you, and like in like the problem, like the pain of the emotion kind of goes away, right? It like instantly goes away, and it's replaced with like this compassion, right? And it's like it's an amazing, like when you do it and you do it right, it's such an amazing, just like it's refreshing, it feels great, and like it gives you energy. You're not just like anymore from those emotions, right? Because everyone has emotions that makes them feel that way. So anyway, so that's what I've been getting out of this coach. So that's why that book is like the latest book that's been like super instrumental, because I found the guy that he was talking about, and I'm having like these kind of experiences. So that's awesome.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a great point, and just the importance of having a coach and how impactful that can be. We all have our own blind spots. We all have our own internal struggles, and to be able to talk with someone else that can then walk us through, talk us through all of these things that we're discovering and overcoming. And it could be people too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a coach, but obviously people who are trained, in this, specifically mindset, things of that sort, are going to have a greater impact on just like your day to day. So you brought up a great point. Again, just your thoughts are real. I love what you said. You said your thoughts are real, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily true.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great caveat in like when you're feeling something and you're saying something in your head, ask yourself, is this true? What evidence is there to support this thing that I'm claiming in my head? We often say something like, well, I can't do that. I've never done that before. Well, is that true? Just because you haven't done it before, does that mean that you can't do it? Is there anything that you've never done before, but then when you did it, you were able to do it? So it's, again, when we start to learn these,
you'll love the Byron Katie book.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That sounds right up my alley. I think it's an important aspect of how we can reframe our brain to ask the right questions for ourselves. Because if we can put that kind of wordsmith on ourselves, it becomes really impactful. It starts with other people doing it to you, with books, podcasts, coaches, but you can start to use these techniques on yourself, and it can be transformative with with just your day to day and controlling your, ups and downs and swings of emotion, which we all have. So that was a great kind of final closing notes there. So that was awesome. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here. This was awesome. It was so cool to have you and hear stuff that I didn't know about you already, even though, I just saw you like last week. So thank you again for being here. Do you have any final notes or words or advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I just not really. Just go out and whatever you're doing with your life, man. Just make sure that it's gonna make sure that you're enjoying your life while you're doing it, and that you're like making the right choices, right? Like a lot of times, making the right choice doesn't necessarily mean that you're enjoying your life, right? Like being in the army, I realized that, right? Like I had to do some things in the army that weren't like the great, like deploying to Iraq and saying, well, I'm not going to go, right? Like that, like that was the right choice, going, right, and doing what I had to do there. But it wasn't, and I think that making that choice actually made my life better, right? And so now there's other things that I know that, like, if I choose A, it might make my financial life better, but like the things that I really hold dear won't be better, right? And so just making those tough choices and really having those conversations with yourself about like which one of these things is going to make my life better, which is 100% a subjective question, and only you can answer it. So
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks for being here. Thank you all the amazing listeners, and remember, let's keep growing together.
Wait, one more thing. I would first like to say thank you. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this message, please take a moment to write a review. By writing a review, it helps people find this message and helps me help more people. And if you really, really liked it and you think this message could help someone else, take a screenshot, share it on Instagram, and please tag me at Nick J. Boni, NickJBoni, so I can show my appreciation for you. We can all win by helping each other grow. Thank you. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.